Cool. Hello, everyone. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. Today we're doing a hot and sour soup, which is from a recipe that I did a couple months back maybe. Hot and sour soup, if you're not familiar with it, is very frequently, I've been told, not on the East Coast, but over here on the West Coast, very frequently, is a free soup that you very frequently will see come up with like a lot of lunch specials. So it's like super often you can you'll order like a lunch special with like a rice plate or something, and it will be the soup that comes along with that rice plate. So because the reason that it's so frequently that free soup is because it's mostly made of pantry stuff. So it's actually a very, very cheap soup to produce. So that's why Chinese restaurants can afford to give it away so freely. Is because it's really, really cheap to make. I think that we're going to probably do this entire dish with, I don't know, under $5 probably for the whole pot of soup. The particular version that I'm going to be doing today actually uses something that you don't very often see in a hot and sour soup, which is going to be chicken breast. So we're going to be shredding some chicken breast today. That is not actually something that you will commonly come across in a hot and sour soup. But I actually love doing it, and it's something that I picked up from another recipe that I don't remember where I originally saw that anymore. But I love doing it because it kind of makes it a little bit more hearty, gives it a little bit more protein. It's like makes it more of a soup that you can actually eat for dinner, which is what I plan on doing today. So not just a side soup, but actually a main course soup, because we're going to be incorporating a little bit of chicken breast. So it's actually going to be a whole chicken breast in that soup today. So that's my version of hot and sour soup. I don't know how traditional it is, but I also don't know how traditional hot and sour soup is. I'd say it mostly comes from like Chinese American cuisine. So if you have any questions for me, feel free and drop your questions in the chat. Seraphin, oh yeah, hot and sour soup, cool. I love hot and sour soup too. It's one of my favorites. I love that it's one of those soups that you've probably had a lot, but very, very often this might be a soup that you don't often order. It's probably something that you've had a lot. So figuring out how to make it has been very, very interesting, mostly because I don't really feel like, I'm not super big on light soups. I mostly just like to eat soups when they're super, super hearty. So I love pho, for example. Pho is a Vietnamese soup, and it's super, super hearty because it has a whole bunch of stuff in it. Super often it'll have like tripe in it or something. So things like that, those are the kinds of soups that I enjoy. So the reason that I'm adding chicken breast to this particular hot and sour soup is to make it so it's something that I can actually eat and just fill up on. So yeah, if you have any questions though, feel free and drop those questions in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer everyone. If you're looking for the recipe, that always lives over on the YouTube channel. So if you haven't hopped over to the YouTube channel and caught some of those recipes, those are out every Friday. So this hot and sour soup recipe came out, I want to say back in like November or December, maybe in January or so. And that came out a couple of Fridays ago though. Last Friday was the recipe for beef chow fun, which we actually cooked through live yesterday. And then before that, I can't remember what else we've done. I think the week before that we did chicken katsu, and then I'm kind of blanking now. But those are out every Friday though, so if you haven't caught one of those recipes, definitely bop over to the YouTube channel and check those out. I tend to move a little bit slower in those recipes and kind of like talk my way through some of the decision making that goes behind those recipes, and like why I add certain stuff, why I leave some stuff out, things like that. They come up in those recipes a lot. So if you're looking to figure out how to cook the things that I cook, definitely check that stuff out. We're working our way to 3,500 subs by the end of April, so if you want to help us hit that goal, go over and give it a subscribe. You made an Excel sheet and rated all of the soups in 5 categories. That's very committed to soups. Wow. Pretty popular. Yeah, Sarah, pretty popular back home in India. That's cool. Yeah, hot and sour soup. It's I think you could probably find it at literally every Chinese restaurant in the Bay Area. But again, it's one of those soups. I've had it a lot. I've had it all the time, and like especially for lunch specials. But I don't know that I have ever actually ordered it. I think it's always been the soup that you get for free. But I've also been told that like in other places in the world, it's definitely not a free soup. It's a soup that you actually pay for. The version that, I should say, the recipe that I wrote that inspired this particular version of this hot and sour soup is part of a series that I've been doing where I've been hacking a lot of recipes that come from restaurants here in the San Francisco Bay Area. So this particular version is inspired by a version of hot and sour soup that you can get at a restaurant here in Oakland called Shandong. And Shandong, their hot and sour soup, it comes free with their lunch special for sure. And that's probably the main context that I've had hot and sour soup at Shandong, is with their lunch special. But their version of hot and sour soup, though, it definitely does not contain chicken. If it contained chicken, it for sure would not be a free soup, because that would be way too expensive to try and make for free. So, like pretty much every savory recipe that I've ever done. Starting off, that was 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, and then what I'm doing right now is a fine mince on my ginger, so about a tablespoon or 1 inch's worth of ginger. Ginger, I've mentioned this a lot now, but ginger is really hard to measure because it's such a weird shape. So before you chop it, it can be really hard to measure because it's oftentimes a very, very oblong or like weird looking piece of root that's very difficult to measure. But usually what I'll say is about a tablespoon or around 1 inch's worth of ginger, but I have definitely mismeasured before chopping. And that just leaves you with some extra ginger at the end of the day. So once it's minced, though, it's pretty easy to check. Yeah. Ooh, lots of questions. Oh, hot and sour soup with wonton. That sounds really good. That is definitely not a free soup. I might actually try that, though. Wontons are one of my favorites. I haven't made wontons in a long time, though. Usually if I'm putting that much effort into making a dumpling, I'm probably making pot stickers. But because like making wontons it's just like such a heavy effort. Maybe I'll like buy some frozen wontons and then I'll throw it into the soup. That might actually work. Yeah, it's all about, like, how much effort you want to make, though. Here they are. Cool. All right, so yeah, Boring Planet, Boring Planet, good username. Yeah, what are we cooking? So today we're doing, I mentioned this a minute earlier, but today we're doing a hot and sour soup, which is kind of like a Chinese American classic. Probably comes from somewhere in like mainland China too. But as far as I know, it's a pretty like Americanized dish. And the particular version that we're making today is probably not one that you'll find at a restaurant. I don't think I've ever seen hot and sour soup with shredded chicken. But the way that I'm going to be doing it today is with shredded chicken. And that's mainly to give it a little bit more heartiness, which I love doing, so that we can eat it for dinner, which is what I'm going to be doing today. So, yeah, totally, cool. All right, so what I'm doing right now is slicing up my green onions. So today, you will very frequently will see me slicing up green onions separated, but today what I'm actually going to do is slice all of this up for our garnish. So that means every bit of green onion that we're going to be using is going to serve as a garnish. So what's particularly different about that is that if we use the whites of green onions as a garnish, those things are really, really fragrant and really, really pungent if you bite into one. It's pretty much the equivalent of biting into a raw onion. So that means you can still use it as a garnish. Usually what I like doing is giving it a cook. So if I'm doing it in a wok stir fry, I'll probably cook those whites first. But today, since we're actually just making a soup, there won't be any opportunity to cook it. So I'm actually going to use all of it as a garnish, which means that when we use it as a garnish, we need to slice it very specifically. It needs to be really, really thin. Otherwise, when you bite into those whites, it's going to be really, really, I guess, like abrasive. Or at least very, very pungent. It's going to be in your face. Which, if that's your thing, then go for it and make those really, really large. But usually what I'll do is you'll notice that the whites of my green onions are very, very small. We're slicing them super, super thin, about as thin as I can get them. Because if they're any larger than that, you're going to be tasting them. Like really tasting them. So that's generally going to apply anytime that I'm using the whites of green onions as a garnish. So we want them to be pretty thin, otherwise, man, those things will punch you in the face for sure. Cool. Yeah, oh, that's cool. Yeah, they already have wontons and they made, yeah, that's good. That's nice. That's really nice of them. All right. Oh, you're watching it on the side while working. Cool, yeah. Lots of people have told me that they like doing that. What I've been told is that lots of people have like to binge watch the recipe videos. So I know that lots of people put those playlists on repeat and then just like watch it while working, which I've been told is very relaxing apparently. So that's cool. There's like, I think there's probably like 5 or 6 hours worth of recipe videos on the YouTube channel now. So if you want, you could totally do that. You could probably put that thing on repeat and just binge watch Who Can Cook recipes for several hours. I don't know that I would do that, but if you're just looking for something to play, yeah, you could do that. Cool. All right, so next up, what I'm doing is dicing up. This is going to be a large dice. Some soft tofu. So I feel like I probably talk about this every time that I mention soft tofu, but it's really, really important, and that is that soft tofu is crazy delicate. We can even look. So I'll take a piece, and what will happen is if you do anything to it that's too aggressive, it will literally crumble. So you can see that's my tofu, and now it's like a crumbled piece of tofu at this point. So we really don't want that to happen. That's like the worst possible thing that you can do with soft tofu is let it crumble like that, because that's not really something that you want to eat. Crumbled tofu is really gross. So since it's so delicate, we have to treat this very, very specifically, which means mainly what it means is we're going to put it into the pot really, really late. So it's probably going to go in like 5 minutes before I finish cooking it. Because if we throw it in any earlier, then the more aggressively that we stir the pot, the more that this stuff is going to break apart. So that's even more important when you're dealing with it in wok stir fries. But in a soup, it's also really, really important because you don't want to break that tofu apart. Otherwise, you're going to be eating crumbled tofu, which is going to be like kind of like weird cold scrambled eggs, which is not good. Don't do that. Cool. So that's our tofu. Yeah. Myself, did I go to culinary school? I definitely did not go to culinary school. I mostly taught myself and just like learned on the internet. I went to music school actually, so I went to UC Berkeley for music. And I used to play music for a living until it happened, and now there's no more music, so now I do this. So that's cool. Cool. Oh, do I know where in China my family comes from? In a couple of different places, but my parents are both from Taiwan. And then I forget exactly where my grandparents came from before Taiwan. I know that my brother tracked it down, but I forget where specifically. But at some point, we were all from mainland China. And then I know that my parents both immigrated here from Taiwan during the Chinese Revolution. So lots of like Chinese people fleeing to America during that time, around the 70s, 80s, something like that. Good question. That's it. That's probably not even something that I've asked myself in a while. So, very good question. All right, so right now what I'm doing is I'm assembling the sauce that's going to go into our soup. So it starts off pretty simple, or pretty similar to most wok stir fries. So that's 4 tablespoons of soy sauce, and then 2 tablespoons of sesame oil. And then what else are we doing? There it is. 2 tablespoons of dark soy sauce. That's going to give it a little bit of like sweetness. So in the realm of like hot and sour soup, the like third element that very frequently gets kind of dropped at the wayside is that there's quite a bit of sweetness in a hot and sour soup too, which balances it out. And then the big 2 that are going to come up are the olive hot, which is going to come from our doubanjiang, which is what we're adding right now. Doubanjiang, I use this in a lot of recipes, but doubanjiang comes from the fermentation of chilies. So it is very, very hot. So when we're talking about hot and sour soup, this is where hot comes from, is the doubanjiang. And then when we get into the sour, we're going to be using more rice vinegar than I have ever added in any other recipe in my entire life. What we're going to add is an entire 1/4 cup of rice vinegar, which is a absolutely insane amount of rice vinegar. Usually I would not add more than like a tablespoon or maybe 2 tablespoons of rice vinegar. And if you're adding 2 tablespoons of rice vinegar to anything, it's probably already pretty bright and pretty acidic. So a 1/4 cup, which I believe is the equivalent of 4 tablespoons, is probably close to 4 times more rice vinegar than I would add to any single recipe. But it is going to be the source of where all of the sourness in our hot and sour soup comes from. So it actually works. And when I first started testing this recipe, I think I originally started out with like maybe 2 tablespoons. And then I just kept increasing it. And Now we're at a 1/4 cup. And I might actually add more too when I start seasoning or tasting the seasons. Cool. So that's our sauce base. This is going to go into our stock, but first we want to bring our stock to a boil before we add this. And then, next up, what we're going to do, I think I just did that in the wrong bowl. I did. Switch these over. And I also just noticed this isn't breaking apart. Really, really important about doubanjiang is that it doesn't like to break apart. So kind of like miso paste, it doesn't like to come apart because it's a fermented paste. So be very, very careful when you use that stuff. Make sure that it's broken apart. Otherwise, you'll probably end up with like clumps of doubanjiang. It's not fun. Okay. Next up, we're going to be using 2 different kinds of mushrooms today. If you can't find both or all of these, you don't have to use all of them. If you can get your hands on them, though, I totally recommend doing it because they're really, really good. Today we're using, that's 6, I think that was 6 shiitake mushrooms, followed by 2, maybe like 1 wood ear mushroom. Actually, this is actually black fungus, not wood ear. They have 2 kind of pretty different flavors to them, but more importantly is they have 2 very, very different textures about them. Whereas like a shiitake mushroom, we're going to slice that into pretty thin strips, and that's just going to be almost like noodle-like. It has like that quality where when it's sliced really thinly, it's very noodly. Whereas like a wood ear mushroom is a little bit more chewy. So I love using both of them because you get a nice contrast of texture in both of these. These particular 2 mushrooms, the ones that I'm using right now, are particularly thin. So these are probably going to hydrate within like 5 minutes or so. But if you're using thicker mushrooms, which probably most of the time when you come across a shiitake mushroom, it's going to take a lot longer to hydrate because it's going to be a lot thicker. So if you're using thick shiitake mushrooms, no kidding, those things will take at least like 20-30 minutes to hydrate. And super often when I'm working with really thick shiitake mushrooms, I'll probably even hydrate those before I start the stream. It will be like the thing that I do before I even start cooking because they actually take that long to hydrate. And shiitake mushrooms, when they're not hydrated properly, are really, really hard to cut because they're still dry, so you can't even chop into them. So they're basically inedible and not workable if they're still dry. So you really want to make sure that stuff is hydrated before you start chopping into it. But when you have really thin ones, they hydrate. These will probably be done hydrating in maybe 5 minutes. And they also taste better too. So if you can get your hands on them, find yourself some really thin shiitake mushrooms. Slight edge, why not just get extra firm tofu? Yeah, that's a good question. You could use extra firm tofu. Actually, most of the recipes that I've seen when I was researching this recipe call for firm tofu. And I think the reason behind that is that like it won't break apart in the soup. But I don't think that's a very good reason because I don't like the texture of firm tofu. I really only will use firm tofu if I'm frying it. So there's only a couple of situations where I'll actually use firm tofu. And those are mostly when I'm like wok frying or sometimes deep frying it. So I use firm tofu in hongshao tofu, for example, which is like kind of like the General Tso's chicken of tofu, where it's like breaded in cornstarch and then it's deep fried and then sauteed and braised. Other than that though, I really don't like the texture of firm tofu because it's like almost a little bit chewy and like in a soup that's not very tasty. I just don't like that texture. So usually pretty much any time that I'm using tofu in a soup, I'll probably use soft tofu because it's really, really delicate and has like a more like better mouthfeel, I guess. It's like you can bite into it and it's not going to feel like you're biting into a piece of chicken. It's just really, really delicate. It kind of reminds me of like tapioca. It's a little bit in that world. So it does mean that we have to treat it a little bit more delicately because it's so delicate. But I think it's worth it, so you don't have to deal with the weird, gross texture of firm tofu. But yeah, otherwise the only real situation where I use firm tofu is if I'm frying it or like trying to sear tofu. Yeah, ooh, RKK6, yeah, how's it going? Hello. Sarah, oh yeah, is this a soup that you could freeze? You could totally freeze this. And same thing, I say this about the Westlake soup that we did a couple weeks ago, is that if you are gonna freeze it, hold the tofu back, and then you don't want to try and freeze tofu. Weird things happen to tofu. My mom explained, I don't know why my mom knew this, but my mom explained the food science to this once. And I forget exactly why, but what happens when you freeze tofu is that when it unfreezes, it doesn't unfreeze in the same way that it was frozen. So like something happens to the cell structures where the water will separate from the soybean. And then when it unfreezes, it turns like really, really chewy. And almost like, well, you'll see it has like holes in it. So I guess the soybean and the water are not rebinding together when it unfreezes. So it's still edible. It's going to be fine. But you're going to have like some really weird textures going on, which to me that's a little bit unideal. So if you are planning on freezing it, which generally if you're making this much soup, you're probably trying to freeze it meal prep, then probably just hold back on the tofu and then add the tofu right before you serve it. So you could reheat it and then drop some tofu in, and then almost like a garnish because it's so delicate. All right, so this is 2 eggs. We're going to drop this in towards the end. It's going to be part of our egg drop of our soup. All right, and before, I know there's a whole bunch of questions, but before I do that, I'm going to hop over to the stove and we're going to get our soup base going. So we need 6 cups of beef stock right now. So I ran out of stock today, so I usually would be using a homemade beef stock, but today I actually used all of it because we've been cooking so much that I just ran out of beef stock. So today I'm going to be using a stock from bouillon, which is totally fine. If you're using powdered stock, don't feel bad about it. I use powdered stock when I cook all the time. But what it does mean is that because powdered stock is not nearly as thick or gelatinous as homemade stock, because homemade stock is deriving a lot of cartilage from the meats that you're using. So if you're making beef stock, that cartilage from the beef bone is coming off in the stock, and that's what makes it gelatinous. So without that gelatinous qualities, we have to compensate for the fact that there's not quite as much thickness in the stock. So what we're going to be using today is our chicken bouillon powder. So this is chicken bouillon powder, which is just stock from powder. Not nearly as good, but it'll be fine. But because it doesn't have as much gelatinous qualities to it, we have to compensate by adding a little bit more cornstarch, which we're going to add in a bit. All right, so that's our stock. I'm going to get that boiling. That you probably take about 5 minutes or so. But if you can remember to do it and you don't run out, I highly recommend making your own stock because it is so flavorful. And like the real secret, I feel like the real secret ingredient to like almost everything that I cook is beef stock, homemade beef stock, which is funny because I like to call it garbage water because beef stock is essentially garbage water. You're basically boiling a bunch of food scraps and then making the water out of it, which is garbage water. So. Cool. Yeah. So that's our stock. We're going to get that going, and then we're going to start moving on to our chicken next. R. Davis, what's the difference between dark soy sauce and regular soy sauce? So there's a pretty big difference between dark soy sauce and regular soy sauce. As far as I look at it, I don't think that they're similar at all. I don't think they have very many similar qualities. I guess they probably come from the same type of fermentation. But other than that, there's not a lot that's going on that's similar, at least in flavor. So dark soy sauce is a lot sweeter and a lot thicker. And like probably most importantly, it's a lot more concentrated than regular soy sauce, which I guess in that respect would also make it a lot saltier. So you really don't want to use dark soy sauce in the same way that you would use regular soy sauce. So usually when I'm using regular soy sauce, I'll be pretty heavy-handed with it. So I think we use like a whole quarter cup of soy sauce, regular soy sauce in our sauce base today. With dark soy sauce, you don't want to do the same thing because that stuff is so concentrated that you will very easily be over seasoning with that stuff. So you will very rarely will see me using more than like a tablespoon or 2 of dark soy sauce because it's so concentrated. Yeah. Oh, mushroom water. Yeah, Sarah. Yeah, that's exactly what I was planning on doing. Thank you for mentioning that. Good use of the mushroom water in your when you're rehydrating shiitake mushrooms. Lots of people just dump that shiitake mushroom water, the water that we're rehydrating our mushrooms in. But this stuff, the stuff that we're using to hydrate our mushrooms in right now, is filled with umami. So this has a whole bunch of like mushroom qualities to it. So don't just dump that stuff. Use it, save it, and you can add some quantities to it. I'll probably add like maybe half a cup or so, and that's going to give us a nice umami boost. All right, next up, I'm moving on to my chicken breast here. So I was trying to fillet this, but it's still a little bit frozen. It doesn't particularly matter. Mostly what I'm looking for here is I'm just trying to slice into the chicken breast so that we don't have a really thick piece of chicken. What we're going to be doing next is we're going to be poaching our chicken breast. So we're going to drop this into our chicken broth, or into our, I guess we're using chicken broth today. And then we're going to let it boil, so that's essentially poaching it. It's a lot harder to poach a piece of chicken breast when it's really thick, because it's going to poach unevenly. So like the thicker part is going to take a lot longer to cook than the thinner part, which means either one of two things is either the thick part is going to be undercooked or the thinner part is going to be overcooked. So in order to make sure that it cooks evenly, we're just going to slice it in half, make sure that we have this nice fillet going. So we have something that looks like this, and it's a little bit more evenly filleted. If I was doing something where I was like, say, making so like chicken katsu, for example, where we needed like a really delicate and even fillet, I probably would have done that more carefully, but it's split in half, and it'll be fine. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, good question. Any big difference between chicken stock and beef stock? I honestly have not tasted a big difference. The real reason why I was using beef stock is because I got a bunch of beef bones for free. And I've been making beef stock ever since I got those bones. Usually I would probably lean more towards chicken stock, but I would say is like the only time that I really taste a big difference is when you're making soup, like right now. So I think the fact that we're not using homemade stock is going to make a pretty big difference in the quality of the soup today. So I think relative probably to the last maybe 2 times that I've made this soup where we're using that homemade stock, there's so much more flavor and like thickness that comes from that homemade stock that we're not going to have today because we're making stock from powder. But other than that, I really don't taste a huge amount of difference. And like as far as like especially as far as like when you're cooking with it, because really what we're doing is just trying to build out a little bit more thickness and richness to a sauce base. So if you're adding, say, like a stock to like a jjajangmyeon, for example, really what you're trying to do is like thicken up the sauce, and that's not really going to make a huge difference whether or not you're using chicken stock or beef stock. But when you're making soup, though, big difference. So that would be like the difference between like nuromin and chicken noodle soup, I guess. So jiromin, nuromin and jiromin, I think. Is that right? Juromin. And my Chinese is really rusty. Yeah. Yeah, cool. So over on the stove, I have my stock pot going. We're waiting for this to boil. Nothing's really happening over there. There's no reason to point that over there. Right now, we're just waiting for our stock to boil. Once that hits a boiling point, we're going to drop our chicken in, along with our aromatics. And then we're going to get a nice poached piece of chicken. And after that, it really comes together pretty quickly. After that, we're pretty much just stirring soup. So, but I think like the big element that we're going for right now is this chicken breast. So, cool. Yeah. Cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST. New recipes coming out over on the YouTube channel every Friday, so if you haven't caught one of those recipes, they're coming out every Friday. I think the recipe for this hot and sour soup came out, I think that was maybe back in October or November, maybe a little bit later than that, might have been in December or so. Those are out every Friday though, so last Friday we came out with the recipe for, last Friday was the recipe for beef chow fun, which is what we cooked through yesterday. Friday before that we did some chicken katsu, and then before that we did something else. Maybe that was Japanese curry, something like, Taiwanese popcorn chicken. Those are coming out over on the YouTube channel every Friday. So if you haven't caught one of those recipes yet, definitely hop over to the YouTube channel and check that stuff out. There's a whole bunch of series that are in progress right now. So this hot and sour soup is from a series that I've been doing, where I've been reproducing a lot of like the popular dishes from restaurants in the San Francisco Bay Area. So this hot and sour soup comes from a noodle spot here in Oakland called Shandong. That's part of our Bay Area restaurant hack series. There's another series that's really fun where I've been reproducing a lot of the foods from like Chinese American cuisine. So that's usually like General Tso's chicken, honey sesame chicken, stuff like that. And kind of deconstructing some of those really Americanized Chinese dishes and taking a look at what are the American qualities of those things and then reconstructing them without those American qualities. So like essentially, what does it look like if you were to try and do like honey sesame chicken, but through the lens of like traditional wok cooking? What would that dish actually taste like if it was actually Chinese food? Because most of those things aren't Chinese food, they're really just American food. So stuff like that all lives over on the YouTube channel. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely hop over and check out what's going on over there. We're working our way to 3,500 subscribers by the end of the month, so end of April. So if you want to help us hit the subscriber goal, hop over. If you're watching on Reddit, that's the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, you're already there. Good job. All right, so our stock is boiling. This is also one of the first and only recipes that I'm gonna not have to turn my overhead on, by the way. And then we're going to start with is all of our wet ingredients first. So I'm starting off with my sauce base. And then, as Sarah mentioned this earlier too, what I like doing is dropping a little bit of this mushroom water in, not the mushrooms. The mushroom water, obviously pretty self-explanatory, but the mushroom water has a lot of mushroom qualities to it because it's been soaking in mushrooms for a while. So has a lot of umami, the same kind of umami that you derive from those mushrooms. So if you're vegetarian, when you see like vegetarian oyster sauce or vegetarian fish sauce, all of those sauces, they're made from this water. So they're sometimes made from the water of the mushrooms or sometimes made from the powder of the mushrooms. But it's all of that artificial fishy umami, it's derived from mushroom powder, sometimes mushroom powder or sometimes mushroom water. So if you've ever experimented with vegetarian Asian sauces, it's probably using some element of those mushroom water. And okay, so I just added all of my wet ingredients here, and then we just noticed that this is no longer boiling, so I'm going to cover this back up. Bring that up to a boil again. A couple of things are going to happen during that time, so probably the main thing is that first of all, it's going to come back up to a boil, so we want that thing boiling before we add the chicken. But the other thing that's going to happen is it's going to bloom out the aromatic qualities of all of the things that we just put in there. So mainly, that's our ginger and garlic. So we want all of those qualities to start coming out and becoming fragrant before we add the meat in, because it's going to infuse the meat with those aromatic qualities too. So I feel like I see people make this mistake all the time, but like garlic and ginger has to go in pretty early, which lots of like amateur chefs, especially in wok cooking, are afraid to do that because they're worried that it's going to burn. And if you handle it incorrectly, you will absolutely burn that ginger and garlic. But it does need to go in very early, and then you need to approach the way that you use the ginger and garlic very differently from there. But in a recipe like this especially, that stuff, it has to go in pretty early in order to get those aromatic qualities out. Otherwise, you're not going to taste it. So if you've ever had soup that doesn't even taste like ginger or garlic, even though it has a whole bunch of ginger and garlic in it, it's because it was added too late and nothing came out. Yeah, cool. Oh, your husband's going to learn it. Yeah, cool. If you're looking, so I guess I should be linking the recipe. So if you're looking to learn how to cook this, here's the recipe for this. That's the recipe over on the YouTube channel. So it moves a little bit slower, and I like generally talk through some of the decision making, probably talking about some stuff that I forgot that I'm not remembering right now. It definitely talks about like the inspiration of where this comes from and like the restaurant that inspired this version, stuff like that. All living over on the YouTube channel. And I believe the written version, the written recipe is also in the comments too. All right, now we're adding our chicken in. And that should take just a couple minutes. If your chicken is sliced pretty thinly, it probably won't take that long. That'll probably take maybe like 3-4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes tops. and then we're gonna have some nice poached chicken to work with. What you do want to remember is that chicken is pretty cold and your stock pot is pretty hot, so that you're probably going to lose all of the heat in your stock pot. So what I like doing once you add the poached chicken is cover it back up and again bring it back up to a boil. So we're constantly in this battle of losing the heat in our stock pot. So until we start simmering, we pretty much want it at a rolling boil the whole time. Carpe diem, yeah, hey, how's it going? Accomplished nail, yeah, that's a good username. When you're sick, it makes you feel so much better. Yeah, I think that's a quality about the vinegar, I'm guessing. But definitely like a big thing. I don't know how much actual science is behind this. Maybe it's just like an Eastern medicine sort of thing. But any Asian person will tell you that when they're sick, their mom or their grandma will probably have them eat ginger. Usually ginger with ginseng, and it's supposedly like help you like fight colds. I don't know how much science is actually behind that. That might just sound like grandma science, but I definitely have been doing it for as long as I've like been alive, and I just associate the flavor of like ginseng with honey and ginger in a tea as like that's the thing that you drink when you're sick. So probably hot and sour soup, similar world where you like eating a lot of rice vinegar with ginger. I know lots of people say that the big soup that they eat when they're sick is also pho. Lots of people like to eat pho when they're sick. And I think that actually has to do, it's actually not the soup. I think it has to do with all of the sriracha that they're putting in the pho, and that's like the hot sauce that like brings out all of the heat of the pho is what's helping like clear their sinuses. So I think that's a big one. Yeah, carpe diem. Oh, good question. Good question. Yeah, if you're just tuning in, hello. If you're just tuning in, this is Wu Can Cook. Today we're making a hot and sour soup, so it involves a couple of things, but the main things that it involves, which make it a hot and sour soup, are two elements. So the big ones are our rice vinegar. So this is our rice vinegar, plain old rice vinegar, but all of the sourness is coming from this rice vinegar. And then the hot element of our hot and sour soup is coming from our doubanjiang, which is a Chinese-like chili paste. Doubanjiang has an equivalent in like pretty much all Asian cuisines. It has a similar flavor. I think in Thai food, the thing that I equate is probably sambal olek, which is probably the one that you're most familiar with. You'll often will see it even in Chinese restaurants on like the lazy Susan next to the soy sauce. In Korean food, there's a very similar hot sauce. It's called gochujang, which is derived again from the fermentation of chilies into like a paste. In Chinese food, the one that we use is doubanjiang, which is what we're using today. Japanese food has a similar thing that's called miso paste, which is probably the one that you're most familiar with. Is miso paste. Miso paste is a little bit different because it doesn't come from chilies; it comes from soybeans, so it's not quite as hot. Yeah. So our chicken is nearly there. I'm going to give that maybe one more minute before we pull it out. We don't need it to be all the way cooked through. We just need it to be cooked through enough to the point where we can start shredding it, but it does need to be cooked enough so that we can start pulling it apart. Yeah. Oh, tom yum soup. That's been on my to-do list, is tom yum soup. I'm trying to figure that out. Actually, what I've been meaning to do is tom yum soup. So if you've watched the movie Raya and the Last Dragon, so there's I don't want to spoil the movie, but in Raya and the Last Dragon, there's a soup that's very, very prominently featured, and it's a fictional soup from a fictional land. But what they're cooking is actually, I'm pretty sure that's tom yum soup, which is Thai soup, essentially. But it uses a whole bunch of ingredients that I have not ever worked with, because I don't work with Thai ingredients a lot. So I've been working on finding all of those ingredients, and as soon as I find them, then I'm going to do a recipe for tom yum soup, because we can reproduce the soup from Raya and the Last Dragon. Yeah, seafood soup. Yeah, that's essentially what it is. Although it's like, seafood soup is a little bit of an overstatement, because the only real seafood that's in it is shrimp. And I actually don't think that it has actual shrimp in it. I think it's just shrimp heads. I might be wrong about that. I haven't done a lot of homework on tom yum yet. All right. So I'm pulling my chicken out. You can see that it is nice and poached, which basically just means that it's boiled. Which also means, by the way, that it looks very unattractive because it's just boiled chicken. So we can take a look. Not a kind of chicken that you want to eat unless you're like on a cut and you're trying to lose some weight and eat a lot of protein at the same time. Boiled chicken is not very attractive because it's has no sear to it, has no real quality at all to it. It's just chicken that's kind of like been boiled. But what's really great about boiled chicken is that because it has no sear to it or no crispy bits to it, is we can shred it up really easily. So if you tried to eat this right now, it would probably be pretty rubbery. But we can instead pull it all apart. So I'm using 2 forks here and then just pulling everything apart into shreds. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add this back to our wok or stock pot. And that's going to give us that nice shredded bits of chicken to our soup. But definitely, so I think like the most often time that I see the use of boiled chicken is in recipes that are for people who are like trying to go keto, which is a meat diet, so like protein heavy diets. And that's because it doesn't have any other things in it. So boiled chicken, it has like, is very, very healthy because it has no salt in it, has no sodium in it, has no fat in it. Which also, all of which is to say is it has no flavor. It doesn't taste like anything. It's probably a little bit rubbery, but most importantly, it just doesn't taste like anything. That's what makes it so healthy, which is gross. I don't know why anyone would want to do that unless they're trying to lose some weight. So, yeah. Yeah, Carbon, where am I located? Yeah, so I live out in Oakland, Chinatown. So. That's the reason why this particular recipe for this hot and sour soup is inspired by a restaurant here in Oakland called Shandong. So if you find the original recipe, which is over on my YouTube channel, it talks a little bit more about that and the original menu item from Shandong, which inspired this hot and sour soup. In that version, so I've mentioned this earlier too, but the restaurant versions of hot and sour soup that you would order, they're generally made from pantry ingredients. That's often why you'll see it as like the free soup or like the complimentary soup that comes with the lunch special is hot and sour soup. That's definitely the version from Shandong is complimentary soup. It comes with their lunch special. But since it's a free soup, you will very rarely will see the use of any like expensive protein like chicken breast like this because it would be way too expensive to offer this as a free soup. Yeah, oh yeah. I linked this earlier, but here's the recipe one more time, Cook Steven. Yeah. Alright, so our chicken is, you might notice that you can kind of see it, not really. If you look closely, you can kind of see it. But our chicken is not fully cooked, so it's a little bit pink. If this was something that I was going to serve, I would say this is undercooked and we need to finish cooking it. I like to pull this out right before it finishes cooking because it's going to go back into our stock pot for another like 10 minutes, which means that when it goes back into the stock pot, it would end up overcooked. So we want this a little bit on the underside so that we don't overcook it when we put it back in. So right now it's really, really tender and like a nice like tender piece of chicken that's probably right on the cusp of being undercooked, which again means not something that we want to eat, but definitely something that we can par cook and then throw back into this fry. So that's our chicken. Another way. There we go. Yeah, galangal, that's it. That's the ingredient I was thinking of, galangal. That's it, and lemongrass. That's kaffir leaves is the one thing that I can't seem to find. I actually found galangal in Chinatown, but kaffir leaves I can't find it anywhere. I can't even find kaffir. So I think what I've read is that you can substitute galangal with ginger, which is I think is a big no-no, and you're not supposed to do it. But I've read that you can actually do it if you replace some of the like citrusy elements of it. So if you can sub it with ginger plus like a little bit of lime. But kaffir leaves, I don't think there is a good substitute. I've read a bit from people who are saying that you could substitute it with a bay leaf, which doesn't sound accurate at all. I don't think you can use a bay leaf. I think that's completely different. That's a completely different thing. But definitely, lemongrass, you can find that anywhere in Chinatown. But galangal, I found it somewhere in Chinatown, but again, it's also super, super difficult to source. And kaffir leaves is almost impossible. I have not found it anywhere. So I'm at my wit's end. There are no Thai grocery stores here in town, so I'm gonna have to I might have to order it online maybe. But as soon as I figure out where to find those ingredients, I'm gonna try and do that. But definitely galangal and kaffir leaves are really, really hard to source. You found them. You managed to find them. That's good for you. You should definitely make tom yum then. Cool. All right, so back into my stock pot. I'm adding my chicken. We're gonna give that a stir. And again, I'm gonna let that come back up to a boil. So I'm gonna cap that one more time and let that come back up to a boil. In the meantime, we can circle back to our mushrooms, which we have quite a bit of. So if you were watching earlier, you would have seen what these looked like before I started soaking them. They were pretty shriveled up. I think, to me, wood ear mushrooms are actually, these are black fungus mushrooms, look crazy because these looked way different when we started soaking them. They were actually a different color when we started soaking them too. So black fungus mushrooms are pretty crazy because they change so dramatically once you rehydrate them. You can cut these in any number of ways, however you like cutting them. I'm going to cut them into strips because that's how I like my mushrooms. But cut them however you want to cut them. When I do a Westlake soup, usually I'll dice these. But I like these to have a little bit of bite, so we're going for strips today. Oh, the other thing I'll mention about shiitake mushrooms. So my shiitake mushrooms, you'll notice, they don't really have much of a stem going on, so you can take a look. It has a very, very thin stem. But a lot of shiitake mushrooms you will find, especially like mass-produced ones. These are like boutique shiitake mushrooms. They will have a big stem on them, and those things are really, really chewy, borderline inedible. Very, very useful for stocks if you throw those into stocks. But you generally don't want to be eating the mushroom stem of a shiitake mushroom because it's going to be pretty chewy, more or less not edible. So make sure that you chop those off. But save them for your beef stocks or chicken stocks. Right, so that's our shiitake mushroom. Next up is our wood ear. So this is actually black fungus. I keep calling them wood ear, but they're not. And I'm going to do something similar, so I'm going for strips again here. Let the stem on. And I kind of like doing it pretty similar to how you would do like cilantro, as I'm kind of bunching these up and then giving them a slice down, and then I usually like to give it one slice down the center, and that gives us a nice edible or like bite-sized bit of mushroom here. Why use dry mushrooms instead of fresh? Yeah, so I don't know that I've ever seen a fresh shiitake mushroom, but I also don't know the full food science behind this either. But what happens when you dry a mushroom is it pulls out a lot of the umami qualities to it. That's why you use mushroom powder to replicate the flavors of things like oyster sauce or fish sauce. It's because you get more umami once it's dried. So the process of rehydrating is just adding the water back. But the spores, they release those umami flavors once it starts drying, which is probably why you will only ever come across shiitake mushrooms as dried. It also makes them a lot more pantry safe. So you could keep shiitake mushrooms in the pantry for years and it'll still stay good. But if you had fresh mushrooms, probably no more than like a week and a half. But yeah, also more importantly, they have a lot more flavor. Cool. So my mushroom's going into my stock pot. And we're pretty nearly there. The last thing that I'm going to add, these came from a can. So I'm not using, I usually like to be using fresh bamboo shoots. But you kind of have to get to the market early in Chinatown in order to catch those. So these are canned bamboo shoots. They're also pre-sliced, so they look like this. A bamboo shoot, what's happening is this comes from the bamboo plant, which you're probably more familiar with. What these are the root tips. So it's the bottom of the bamboo shoot that stays in the ground. It's boiled and then par cooked in that boil. And then usually if you go to Chinatown, you get there early because they're really, really fresh. You can find them in the back near the produce section. And they kind of look like funnels. They'll have like a little hole in them and they'll be like spiraled. And those are really, really good if you can get your hands on them. I forgot to go to the market today, so I don't have fresh bamboo shoots, so we're using canned ones. The canned ones, they're very, very often, they'll come pre-sliced like this. And I actually think the pre-sliced version is going to be helpful today because we need these to be pretty small. But when I do things like mushu pork, for example, I definitely like to be using those fresh bamboo shoots because you can taste them a lot more. In this case, I don't think you're even going to taste these. It's mostly just going to be for texture. And I'm going to use, I'm sort of eyeballing this, but that's about half a cup of bamboo shoots, or 2 handfuls. All right. Oh, you've never seen dried mushrooms? Oh yeah, totally. So definitely, if you ever go to like a mushroom shop in Chinatown, they will only sell dried mushrooms. And I have this sneaking suspicion that in those Chinatown shops, because they probably don't know exactly what they're selling all the time, you can probably find some psychedelic mushrooms at some of those shops. If you like knew what to ask for and you knew how to say it in Chinese, you could probably find some weird illicit drugs there because they got some weird shit there. So, that's just my guess. Cool. So that's our bamboo shoot in the stock pot. And then we're going to let that come to a boil one more time. The last thing that we have not yet added is our tofu. So here's our soft tofu. I mentioned this earlier too, but we want to hold off on adding this tofu towards the very, very end. So I'm going to add this right before we add our eggs. And that's going to be the very last thing that we put in our stock pot. We want to hold off on those things because the more that you stir them, the more that they're going to start crumbling. So we want to make sure that they don't crumble prematurely. Otherwise, you're going to end up with crumbled bits of tofu, which is not going to be good. The last thing that I'm assembling here is a cornstarch slurry. So you will come across this in a lot of Chinese food. And because it's sort of the element that we use to create thick sauces. So I compare this a lot to the use of pasta water in Italian cooking, where you'll save the water that you cook the pasta in and then use that to thicken up pasta sauces. So things like carbonara, for example, relies very, very heavily on the use of pasta water. It's because that's how you make it turn from like what would essentially otherwise be like an egg scramble into a thick and creamy sauce. That thickness, it comes from the starch from the pasta water. In Chinese cuisine, we do something very, very similar. But instead of the pasta water, we use cornstarch. And this will actually be the last thing that we throw in. We want to save this till the very, very end because this is going to turn our soup into like a thicker and more like cohesive soup. Before that, it's going to be pretty loose. So we want to save this towards the very end so that we don't add this prematurely and like prematurely start thickening it. Otherwise, we don't actually know what consistency it is. Are those French fries in the pot? It's a funny question. There's no such thing as a stupid question. Those were bamboo shoots. So I was talking about this earlier. They're pre-sliced bamboo shoots because they came from a can. If you find them in the market, you can definitely find them in the market. You will see them like in most Asian grocers, especially the Chinese ones, will have them. But bamboo shoots are used in like all Pan Asian. It comes up in Japanese food and like Korean food all the time. So you'll find it at most Asian grocers. It will be like somewhere near the produce. I usually find them in the back at the couple of shops that I go to. But it will be soaking in water, so you'll probably find it in like a big tub. And it will look like something that's alive. So it will sketch you out a little bit because it's like, why is this in a tub? Why are people just reaching in and grabbing it? But what that is, that's bamboo shoot, and it has to be preserved in that water. Otherwise, it'll dry out. So If you can find them though, they'll be like conical shaped, so it'll be conical to a point, and then there will be a little bit of a hole in it because bamboo shoots have a hole that go down the bottom. So that's bamboo shoot. You might also see it's called something like a bamboo tip or like a bamboo root, something like that. But if you can get your hands on the fresh ones, they're a little bit more flavorful. For a recipe like this though, I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference because you're not going to taste them anyway. But when I do like mushu pork or something like that, where I'm like actually going to be eating and like tasting the flavor of those bamboo shoots, I absolutely want to get my hand on some fresh bamboo shoot. But yeah, good question. It does look a little bit like French fries, for sure. Like shoestring French fries. All right. Next up, I'm adding my eggs. So if you've ever done an egg drop soup, it will look a lot like this. Because this is essentially the part where we drop the egg in. But we're not going to just dump it in, so we have our pot is at a rolling boil at this point, or like a rolling simmer. And then we're going to add our eggs in just a little bit at a time. So I'm adding like maybe half a tablespoon in very slowly, and then constantly keeping my soup moving. So you'll notice as I'm stirring, those eggs are starting to cook immediately as soon as they hit the hot soup base. That's because eggs are really, really delicate, and that's why we need to add them very, very slowly. So if we were to drop all of this in at once, you would end up with one giant clump of egg because it would immediately cook as soon as it got into the soup. So the reason that we want to keep the soup constantly moving and we're adding it very, very slowly is so that we end up with these nice wisps of egg. Otherwise, we're going to have essentially like a big scrambled egg in the middle of our soup, which is probably still going to be really good, but not what we're after. So a little bit at a time. Take your time with this. It's only 2 eggs, so it won't take that long. But a little bit at a time. You'll also notice that I have not yet added my tofu yet either. So we don't want that tofu to be in the stock pot here because the stirring process that we just went through while we were moving would have broken apart the tofu. So we don't want that to happen either. And now you'll notice, so you can see it. Yeah, you can definitely see it. We have all of these nice wisps of egg, and that's probably something that you associate with every hot and sour soup that you've ever had. Any like Westlake soup, egg drop soup especially, because that's what egg drop soup is. And that's probably my favorite part about this soup is that nice egg drop. And very, very last going in is our tofu. And I'm just going to let this come up to a boil one more time. Because that tofu is pretty cold. And the last thing that we're going to add right before we finish is our cornstarch slurry, which is over here. And this is just literally just 3 tablespoons of cornstarch dissolved in water. And that's going to give our sauce or our soup all of that thickness. Dinosaur shit. That's good. What are we making? Yeah, today we're making a hot and sour soup. Yeah. Oh. Dried mushrooms in the organic herbs. You could probably find that at like Whole Foods. I don't generally like to be a proponent of shopping at Whole Foods, but you could, if you can't find it anywhere else, you could generally will find them at Whole Foods. But before you go to Whole Foods, check out like Asian grocer or like any like local grocer. Like small boutique grocer will probably have some sort of dried mushrooms somewhere in the back. Yeah, dinosaur shit. I love that username. Hello, if you're just tuning in, my name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning in, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST. Today we're making a hot and sour soup, which is from a recipe that came out over on my YouTube channel a couple weeks ago. I think that was back in like January, maybe. Can't remember. If anyone's looking at the recipe right now, tell me when it's published. But that came out a couple months ago over on the YouTube channel. It's inspired by another hot and sour soup that you can find here in Oakland at a restaurant called Shandong. Shandong, just like a lot of hot and sour soups that you'll find probably in most restaurants, Shandong's hot and sour soup is a free soup that you can get. It comes with like the lunch special, so I think you can get it like either a rice plate or a noodle plate at Shandong. and with like the rice plate or noodle plate plus a hot and sour soup will come with it. Super often you'll find that that is going to be the case in a lot of Chinese restaurants, because a hot and sour soup is really cheap to make. So the ingredients that we just used, probably not counting the chicken, probably the most expensive thing that we just added were those 2 eggs. Other than that, you could probably do this whole soup for like, not including the eggs, probably like $2-3. Including the eggs, that was maybe we spent $5 on this whole soup. So that's the reason why it's so often the free soup, is because at cost, it probably costs them like 50 cents to make that bowl of soup. So it's very cheap for them to offer that soup. Today, the version of this hot and sour soup that we're making includes a single extra protein, which is that shredded chicken, which is going to give it a lot more like heartiness and kind of makes it something that you can eat for dinner, which is what I plan on doing. And I love adding that extra bit of chicken just so that it's like, it kind of fills you up. It's definitely not something that you would traditionally find in a hot and sour soup. Mostly because it would be way too expensive to add that to a hot and sour soup and then try and serve it for free. So if you have any questions, definitely check out that recipe. It kind of walks through some of this stuff a little bit slower. That's all over on the YouTube channel. The channel has a new recipe that comes out every Friday. So this coming Friday is going to be egg foo young. We're coming out with egg foo young, which I'm super excited for because I have not had very much egg foo young in my life. That's definitely like a Americanized Chinese dish. That I didn't realize this, but it actually does have origins from like Hong Kong street food. But when you find egg foo young in Hong Kong, or like traditional egg foo young, it's actually not wok fried in the way that you most commonly will see it here in America, which is essentially like an egg frittata. And like the original or like true origin of egg foo young is actually deep fried, which is what we did. And that's coming out this Friday. So if you're looking for stuff like that, definitely hop over to the YouTube, check out what's going on over there. There's also a concurrent live stream, which is the one that's going behind me. That live stream, it has a whole schedule of everything that we're going to be cooking in the next couple of weeks. So if you're watching over on YouTube, you would have known a couple of weeks ago that I'd be cooking this. Cool. That channel, we're working our way to 3,500 subs by the end of April. So if you want to help us hit the subscriber goal, definitely hop over and give it a subscribe. All right. The last thing I'm adding here, this is my cornstarch slurry. And you'll notice that as soon as we add that cornstarch, our soup base is going to tighten up pretty substantially. So I don't know if you can quite see this on camera, but our soup base is going to go from like pretty loose and pretty watery, especially because we're using like soup base from stock, soup base from powder. But once we add that cornstarch, it's going to tighten everything up, and now we have this more cohesive soup base. And that's where our like really thick and luxurious qualities of our soup come from. So I'm actually going to add a little bit more cornstarch. I was undershooting because I'm more used to cooking this with homemade stock. So that's 1 more tablespoon of cornstarch, and I think that's going to tighten it up a lot more. There we go. So if you were doing a pasta sauce, if this was a bolognese, for example, we would do a very similar thing, but in that bolognese, we would be using pasta water at this point. So if you're familiar at all with Italian cooking, a very similar thing that you do in Italian cooking. Ooh, the spam fried rice. Yeah, if you make that, definitely let me know how it goes. That is actually one of the dishes that's offered over on Chef. So if you happen to live in the Bay Area, I also do delivery for a lot of, not everything that I cook on stream, but a lot of the things that I cook on stream. You can order it for delivery. And that's every Friday you can order that stuff for delivery. And one of the things that you can order is the spam fried rice. So, camera's not on. Hermina, yeah, how's it going? Thanks for tuning in. You're a little bit late, but you made it just in time. We're about to serve up. Cool. Let's see. Let's see. Actually, this probably should be over here. There it is. Here's the chef profile. If you happen to live in the San Francisco Bay Area, you can order some food from there too. So that's where essentially what you'd be ordering are basically everything that I cook on stream, which is cool. All right. So this is definitely not something that's super common in like soup. Maybe it is, but it's definitely the way that I grew up eating soups, especially with Westlake soup, is with a little bit of rice at the bottom. And I think that the reason that my mom always had us do this is to stretch the soup a little bit farther, because teenage boys eat a lot of food. But I like eating it with a tiny bit of rice at the bottom, and it gives it like a little bit more of a tighter like texture to it. And once again, I'm being very careful about how we handle that soft tofu, because it will still break apart if you're not careful with that stuff. Reasonably priced, yeah, thank you. All right. I'm finishing this off with, this is going to be our green onions to garnish. And that is it. All right, let's give this a taste. Ooh, yeah, that's really good. I think it might need a little bit of salt, but other than that, I think that's there. Really, really tasty. Like a lot of like nice heat from that doubanjiang, and like a really nice, interesting like sourness that's coming from that rice vinegar. Definitely, it still works with the stock from bouillon. Not quite as rich as you would get it if we were using that stock from like homemade stock. And definitely the extra cornstarch is helping to compensate for the lack of gelatin from the bones. But still works really, really tasty. And I love the egg drop in the hot and sour soup, because it's one of the only egg drop soups that I've seen or come across that does the egg drop and also includes the yolk. Super, super often when you see egg drops, it will probably be egg drops with egg whites only. But most of the time, as far as I can tell, this is true for most hot and sour soups. It's definitely true for my version of hot and sour soup. It includes the egg yolk, and that gives it like a little bit more thickness to it. Definitely more egg white, or definitely more egg presence. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really good. Ooh, yeah, super good. And I love that the green onion garnish has the whites in it too, because they're really, really pungent. It's almost like it's garnished with a little bit of raw onion, and kind of like really stands out. And it has a little bit of brightness to it, like freshness and fragrance that comes from those whites, that like adds, like complements the hot and sour soup, like the richness of the soup really, really well. So one of my favorite soups, probably second to the Westlake soup that we do a lot. So cool. Yeah, cool. All right, thanks everyone for tuning in. If you haven't yet, definitely check out the recipe videos going on over on YouTube. And I know that Hermina just tuned in too, so she's going to be watching the replay. YouTube will have a replay of this whole stream too, so you can check that out too if you just tuned in. The recipe for this, it came out over on the YouTube channel. I think that was 3-4 weeks ago, maybe longer than that. I can't remember anymore. Those are out every Friday though, so if this is your first time tuning in, we're streaming every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST, and then every Friday there's a new recipe video. So the recipe for this came out a couple weeks ago, and that's every Friday. So this is part of a larger series that we've been doing, reproducing a lot of food from the San Francisco Bay Area food scene. So this one comes from a noodle spot here in Oakland called Shandong, which if you live in Oakland, Shandong is like a really legendary spot. I'm pretty sure they've had like national reviews and stuff. They're really popular. What's really interesting is that they're not popular for their hot and sour soup, because the hot and sour soup at Shandong, just like most hot and sour soups that you'll come across, is free. It's the free soup that you get. So the reason that I was interested in reproducing this is because I wanted to make a version of hot and sour soup that you could actually eat for dinner, and it would fill you up. So very often when you get that free soup, it's not meant to fill you up, it's meant to be the appetizer. So the version that we just made today, it has some shredded chicken, which gives a nice bit of heartiness to it. So if you haven't checked that stuff out yet, definitely hop over to YouTube. Check out some of that stuff. Lots of fun content coming up. This Friday coming up is going to be egg foo young. Friday after that, I believe, is going to be dandan mian. We're doing some dandan mian from another spot here in Oakland called Good to Eat. And then Friday after that, I think we're doing egg custards after that. So if you haven't checked that stuff out yet, definitely hop over. Muk Bing Shot. Shoot, good one. Yeah, really good. So yeah, if you haven't checked that stuff out, definitely hop over to the YouTube. Check out what's going on over there. We're working our way to 3,500 subs by the end of the month, end of next month. So if you want to help us hit that goal, hop over and check it out. Let me know if you have any more questions. I know I probably missed something because I wasn't paying attention. So if you have any more questions, feel free and drop them in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer everyone. I'll be here doing dishes and stuff too. So last thing, lots of people ask about the music too. So if you're looking for the beats that go under my voiceover, that's all over at another channel called Woo Cooks Beats, which is here. So if you're looking for that stuff, it all lives over there. It's also on Spotify too. So there's a new track that's coming out this Friday, actually, featuring my buddy Jay. So, all right, I'll see you soon.
the sweetest strawberry wine. Your bed warm, glass of brandy, darling, I'll stay stoned on your love all the time.
Slow. If you come over and start up a conversation with just me, then trust me, I'll give it a chance. Now take my hand, stop, put Ben the man on the jukebox, and then we start to dance. Now I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me, said boy. Let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead.
I'm in love with the shape of you. We push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too, I'm in love with your body. And last night you were in my room, and now my bed sheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with your body. 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 Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the shape of you.
One weekend we let the story begin. We're going out on our first date. You and me are thrifty, so go all you can eat. Fill up your bag and I fill up a plate. We talk for hours and hours about the sweet and the sour and how your family is doing okay. We'll even get in a taxi, we'll kiss in the backseat, tell the driver make the radio play. Now I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy, don't mind me. Said, boy, let's not talk too much. Grab on my waist and put that body on me. Come on now, follow my lead. Come on now, follow my lead.
I'm in love with the shape of you. We push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too. I'm in love with your body. And last night you were in my room. And now my bed sheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with your body. 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 Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the shape of you.
Come on, be my baby, come on. 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 Come on, be my baby, come on.
I'm in love with your body. Every day discovering something brand new.
Ta cũng bình thường.